There was a pear tree close to our own vineyard, Augustine says, heavily laden with fruit, which was not tempting either for its color or its flavor. In Book 2, up to this point, Augustine has been talking a lot about a sinful nature that was developing in his adolescence, and he talks about a lot of sinful things. And he's coming up to a climax where he wants to really examine the nature of sin. So he's going to tell us of a really bad thing which he feels represents sinfulness in general. And what is that sin? It's a little hijinks with some friends in a vineyard stealing some pears from a tree. In section 9 he says, "For I pilfered something which I already had in sufficient measure, and of much better quality. I did not desire to enjoy what I stole, but only the theft and the sin itself." What is it about stealing some pears from a tree with some buddies that is so awfully bad? Why does he use this as a kind of a climax of a whole book talking about the movement of his adolescence from sin to sin and deeper sin? He says, doing this pleased all of us more because it was forbidden. Now, Augustine's a wonderful writer, a classical writer. I have no doubt that this story is true, but even if it's true, there can be symbolism in it. And are we not reminded of another tree? Are we not reminded of another fruit where there was famous sin? I can't help but thinking that St. Augustine has the book of Genesis in mind, the sin of Adam and Eve, the stealing of the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Augustine is taking some forbidden fruit here. He's wanting to tell us something about the nature of sin in general. So what is it about this particular crime, and I guess we could say that it's a very small crime, a little misdemeanor, the kind of thing that you could expect the guy who ran the vineyard to forgive quite easily. What is it about this that makes it such a point of concentration for Augustine? Well, ordinarily, we sin by choosing some good thing in the wrong way, or choosing some good thing for some bad purpose. And Augustine acknowledges that. He says, now there is a loveliness in all beautiful things, and in gold, and in silver, and in all things that God has created. God has created everything good, and there is something good in everything. But he notes that he and his friends were not seeking anything good from the pear tree. They had better pears at their home on their tables that their moms provided for them, so they weren't stealing these pears to eat them. They weren't stealing them to give to somebody else. They took them and they threw them to the pigs, and they had a chuckle about it. So what is the motive? What is the good thing that's being pursued here? If most sins are pursuing good things in a bad way, what's the good thing that's being pursued here? Augustine does something quite surprising by comparing his crime to the crime of murder. He says, a man has murdered another man. What was his motive? Either that man desired his wife or his property, or else he would steal to support himself. There has to be some reason why a man murders another man. He's not saying that murder is good. Obviously, it's a terrible crime. It's a terrible evil. But he's saying usually there is some kind of a good thing that somebody wants to get at by killing somebody. So Augustine raises the question, would a man commit murder without a motive, taking delight simply in the act of murder? Who would believe such a thing, he says. So he does not think that that would happen. Yet, he says, I stole those pears simply that I might steal. Simply that I might steal. For if any one of those pears entered my mouth, the only good flavor it has was my sin in eating it. So he was not doing this sin to get at some good. It was the act of the sin or the experience of the sin himself that he and his friends were focused on. So what kind of sin is that? It's not mistaking some good, being mistaken about some good or perverting some good. It's a pure perversion. He sees it as the sin of pride. He says, for thus we see pride wearing the mask of high-spiritedness, although only you, our God, O God, are high above all. So in pride, which he thinks that this sin of the pear stealing is an example of, we put ourselves in the position of God. We ourselves want to make ourselves something like the creator of our own good, not using good pears from a good tree for some good and sinning and stealing it, but making ourselves God, as though we have complete control over ourselves, over the tree, over the fruit, over all of the good things of the earth, that we become somehow the thing that substitutes for God. And he goes on, what profit did I, a wretched one, receive from those things which, when I remember them now, cause me shame, above all from that theft, which I loved only for the theft's sake? And as the theft itself was nothing, I was all the more wretched in that I loved it so. In calling that sin nothing, he's calling our attention to the fact that it is an entire rejection of the good that God has created. It is a rejection of the order that God has created, the being, the world that's filled with beautiful being, beautiful things. His sin was nothing. It was a rejection of all. And it concludes by saying, who can unravel such a twisted and tangled knottiness? It is unclean. I hate to reflect upon it. So he concludes Book 2 by taking us into the depths of the very idea of sin to realize there can be an absolute rejection of all that God has given us.